A dozen good people, maybe less. Kyle agreed to the plan, and we were off in the FBI chopper. He knew the agents at Quantico he wanted involved, and he dispatched them to Tyndon. Once we were on board the helicopter, we reviewed everything we had learned during the previous bank robberies. We also began to receive information on the area where Mrs. Morris had seen the bus. The Army base she mentioned had been a nuke site in the 1980s. ICBMs were kept underground at several nuke bases outside Washington, Kyle said. If the tour bus is on the site, a concrete silo could shield it from heat-seeking search helicopters. Our chopper began to settle down onto an open area near a regional high school. Bright green athletic fields stretched out behind an idyllic-looking two-storied red brick school. The entire area was deserted, except for 2 sedans and a black van waiting for us. We were 4 or 5 miles from the state road where Mrs. Morris had seen the Washington on Wheels bus. Isabel Morris was sitting in the first sedan. She looked to be in her late 70s, a stout woman with an inappropriately cheery, false-teeth smile. "Which farm should we go to first?" I asked her. "Where might somebody be hiding?" The old woman's bluish-gray eyes narrowed to slits as she thought. "Donald Brown's farm," she finally said. "Nobody lives there these days. Brown died last spring, poor man. Someone can hide out there, easy." "Keep going, drive by," I told our driver as we reached the Brown farm on State Road 24. We curled around a bend in the road about 100 yards further on. Then the car eased to a stop. I saw somebody on the grounds. He was leaning against a tree, up near the house. He was watching the road, Kyle, watching us go by. They're still here. Up ahead, I could see the remains of the old missile site that had once been in operation out here. I figured we would find the tour bus hidden in a missile silo, safe from the Apache search helicopters. I wasn't so optimistic about the 19 hostages from Metro Hartford. Kyle said, "Let's go in through the woods." He made contact with the other units. Then he, Betsy, and I ran due north through the dense woods. We couldn't see the farmhouse yet, but we couldn't be seen either. The woods came up close to the main house, which was fortunate for us. The brush was mostly overgrown, almost all the way to the driveway. The lights were off inside the house. There was no movement that I could make out, no sound. I could still see the sentry for the kidnappers. He wasn't too far away, and he had his back to us. Where were the others? Where were the hostages? Why weren't any of the lights on in the house? "What the hell is he doing?" Kyle muttered. He was mystified, just as I was. "Not much of a lookout," Betsy whispered. "I don't like it." "Me either," I said. It made no sense. Why put out a single sentry, and why would the kidnappers still be here? "Let's take him down first. Then we move on the house," Kyle whispered. I gestured to Kyle and Betsy that I was going. I got to the sentry quickly, and with a minimum of noise. I swung out hard with the butt of my pistol. There was a satisfying crunch, and the kidnapper crumpled to the ground. Betsy was crouched low, coming up to me fast. She whispered, "What the hell kind of lookout was that?" A half-dozen agents appeared out of the woods behind us. Betsy signaled for them to stop. There still were no lights in the farmhouse, and no movement. Then Kyle gave the order to go, to move on the house. Everybody was quiet as they ran forward. There didn't seem to be any more sentries or guards. I got to the farmhouse with the first wave of agents. I raised my Glock and kicked the front door open. I couldn't believe my eyes. The hostage group was there in the farmhouse living room. They were staring at me, clearly frightened, but no one was hurt. I did a quick count. 16 women, 2 children, and the driver, all alive. "The kidnappers?" I asked in a low voice. "Are any of them still here?" A dark-haired woman stepped forward and spoke. "They left sentries around the house. There's one man by the elm tree in front." "Not anymore. We didn't see any others," Betsy told the group. "Everybody stay right here while we look around." FBI agents were inside and spreading out all over the house. We did a careful search of the house. No one was there. The tour bus had already been found in a shed on the former Army base. After half an hour or so, Mrs. Morris came waddling through the front door. A couple of agents were futilely trying to stop her. The local woman's appearance was an almost comical punctuation to the stress of the last several hours. "Why did you hit old Bud O'Mara? He's just a nice local fella. Worked at the truck stop. Bud said he was paid to stand around and wait. Got all of $100 for a dent in his skull. He's harmless, Bud is." I was working 12 and 16-hour days. The Washington bank robber named Mitchell Brand was still high on the list of FBI suspects. We hadn't been able to locate Brand, but he fit the profile. Meanwhile, crime scene investigators covered the money pickup site, combing it for evidence. FBI technicians went over every square inch of the Brown farmhouse. Traces of theatrical makeup were found in the sink of the farmhouse. I talked to several hostages, and they supported the idea that the kidnappers might have worn makeup, wigs, and possibly lifts in their shoes. Sampson and I worked in Washington the first 2 days. Metro Hartford had offered a $1 million reward for information leading to the capture of the men involved in the crime. The reward was aimed at the general public, but also at anyone involved in the robbery whose take might be less than the reward being offered. The search for the bank robber Mitchell Brand was also centered in Washington. Brand was a 30-year-old black man who was suspected in half a dozen robberies, but who had never been officially charged, and suddenly had gone underground. Once upon a time, he had been an Army sergeant in Desert Storm. Brand was known to be violent. According to his Army records, he had an IQ over 150. My beeper went off late that night at the house. It was Sampson. "All hell's breaking loose," he said. "Where are you?" I asked. "I'm with Rakeem Powell right now. We're over at the East Capitol dwellings. One of his snitches gave us something good. We might have located Mitchell Brand." "What's the problem, then?" I asked. Rakeem called his lieutenant. The Lou called Chief Pittman, who has half of D.C. on the way here now. I think I actually saw red at that moment. "It's still my goddamn case. Pittman didn't contact me. That's why I'm calling you. Better burn on over here." I met Sampson at the East Capitol Dwellings housing project. According to the snitch, Brand was holed up there. East Capitol Dwellings are what I've heard called a subsidized human warehouse. Actually, the project looks like a failed prison. Cold, white cinder-block fences surround bunker-like buildings. "This has gotten out of control, Alex," Sampson complained, once we were together in one of the dirt-patch yards separating the project buildings. "Way too much firepower here. Too many cooks in the kitchen." I looked around, shook my head, and cursed under my breath. It was a goddamn zoo. I saw SWAT personnel and several homicide detectives, plus the usual neighborhood looky-loos. I quickly put on a Kevlar vest. I checked my Glock. Then I went and talked to the chief of detectives. I reminded Pittman that this was my case, and he couldn't argue with that. I could tell he was surprised that I was at the scene, though. "I'll take it from here," I said. "We got Brand all set up. Just don't fuck it up," Pittman finally snarled, then walked away from me. Senior Agent James Walsh arrived on the scene after I did. No Betsy Cavalier, though. I went up to Walsh. "Where's Senior Agent Cavalier?" I asked. "She had a couple days off. I think she's visiting a friend in Maryland." "You know this Mitchell Brand?" he asked. "I know enough about him. He'll probably be heavily armed if he's up there. He apparently has a new girlfriend named Teresa Lopez. She lives in the project. Lopez has 3 kids. I know her by sight." "Well, that's really great," Walsh said and shook his head. 3 kids, their mommy, and an armed bank-robbing suspect. "You got it. Welcome to D.C., Agent Walsh. Anyway, Brand could have been part of the team that struck Metro Hartford. We have to go get him." A team of 8 of us would go into the 6th-floor apartment to take down Mitchell Brand. As the team checked weapons and put on Kevlar, I began to talk to them. Mitchell Brand is wanted for questioning in the robbery of a Union Trust in Church Falls. He could definitely be our link to whoever is behind the robberies. This is the best suspect we've come up with so far. He could be the mastermind. As best we can tell, Brand's up in his girlfriend's apartment. Detective Sampson will pass around a standard layout for a one-bedroom in the building. Inside the one bedroom, we may find Brand, his girlfriend, and her 3 children, aged 2 to 6. I turned to Agent Walsh. 2 of his agents were part of the Go team. He had nothing to add, but he told his men, "The Washington police will act as the primary at the apartment. We will be back up in the hallway and going into the girlfriend's apartment," he said. "Okay, let's move out," I said to everybody. We entered Building 3, single file, through the dingy, underlit basement. Then we hurriedly marched up several flights of stairs to the 6th floor. I could hear infants crying and small children shouting, the babble of several TV sets, and jazz and hip-hop and salsa music leaking through the thin walls. My stomach was knotted up. Moving in on Brand in a crowded building was a very bad deal, but everybody wanted results, now. I turned to a detective who held a heavy metal ram with 2 hands. "Take the door right the hell down, officer." I looked back at the lineup of tense and anxious men behind me. I held up one fist. "We're going on 4, I said. I gestured with my fingers. 1, 2, 3. The battering ram hit the door with all the shattering force of a professional NFL blocking fullback. The door locks blew right off. We were inside. 2 kids were watching South Park on TV. Where was Mitchell Brand? And where was the kid's mother, Teresa Lopez? Maybe they weren't even home. Sometimes kids got left alone in apartments for days. The bedroom door in front of us was closed. Music was playing somewhere in the apartment. If Mitchell Brand was here tonight, he wasn't too security conscious. I yanked open a bedroom door and peered inside. A small child was playing with a teddy bear on the floor. "Blue Bear," she told me. "Blue Bear," I whispered. I stepped back fast into the hallway. I saw Sampson kick another door open. The apartment layout we'd been given was wrong. This was a 2-bedroom apartment. Suddenly, Mitchell Brand came out into the hallway. He was dragging along Teresa Lopez. He had a .45 caliber handgun pressed up against her forehead. She was a pretty light brown-skinned woman, shaking badly. Both Brand and Lopez were naked, except for gold chains around his thick neck, wrist, and left ankle. "Put down the gun, Brand," I shouted above the din in the apartment. "You're not going anywhere." "Just get out of my way," he shouted. I stood my ground in front of Brand. Sampson and Rakeem Powell came up on either side. "The First Union Bank job in Church Falls. If you're not involved, you've got no problem," I said. "Put down the gun." Brand yelled. "I didn't rob the First Union Bank. I was in New York City that whole week. I was at a wedding, Teresa's sister. Somebody set me up. Somebody did this to me." Teresa Lopez was starting to sob uncontrollably. Her children were crying and calling out for their mother. Detectives and FBI agents held them back, kept them safe. "He was at my sister's wedding," Teresa Lopez screamed at me. "Mommy, Mommy," the kids cried. "Put the gun down, Brand. Get some clothes on. We need to talk to you. I believe you are at a wedding. I believe you and Teresa. Put the gun down." Slowly, Mitchell Brand lowered his gun from the forehead of Teresa Lopez. He kissed the side of her head. "Sorry, baby," he whispered. I was already thinking we'd made a mistake. I felt it in my gut. When he lowered his gun, I knew it. Maybe somebody had set up Mitchell Brand. We'd wasted a lot of time and resources to capture him. We had been distracted for days. I felt the cold breath of the mastermind on the back of my neck. I came home very late from the East Capitol Dwellings project. I needed to wind down, so I played Gershwin and Cole Porter on the piano until I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. Then I climbed upstairs. I fell fast asleep as soon as my head collided with the pillow. I actually slept in the next morning. I finally joined Nana and Damon for breakfast around 7:30. This was a big day for the Cross family. I wouldn't be going into work. I had better things to do. We left the house at 8:30. We were on our way to St. Anthony's Hospital. Janny was coming home. She was waiting on us. Janny was all packed up and dressed when we arrived at her room. Let's go," I can't wait to get home.